Chapter 1. The day I decided not to love him. I died before I realized I was crying. Not from pain, not from fear, but from humiliation. The last thing I saw in that life was his expression. Cold, distant, almost bored. As if watching an insect struggle after being pinned. No anger, no pity, no regret. Just indifference. The man I had ruined everything for didn't even look at me twice as the blade pierced my chest. Warmth spread slowly through my robes, thick and sticky, soaking the embroidered silk I had chosen so carefully that morning. How ridiculous. I had wanted to look dignified when I confessed. I had rehearsed those words for months, polishing them until they sounded noble instead of desperate. In the end, I never got to say them, because the guards moved before I could speak. Because he had already given the order. Because in the story, I was nothing more than a disposable villain. My knees hit the marble floor first. The impact echoed through the silent hall, loud enough to feel like mockery. Someone gasped, probably one of the servants, but no one stepped forward. No one ever did. Above me, the throne room's golden ceiling blurred into a smear of light. My vision tunneled, edges darkening like ink spreading through water. And still, he didn't come closer. He stood beside the Omega protagonist, the one he was supposed to love. One hand lightly resting on that person's shoulder, posture protective, gentle, perfect. Exactly like the novel had described. Exactly like I had read 100 times before falling asleep. Exactly like the scene where I died. How ironic. I had known this would happen. I had memorized it. Yet when the moment arrived, my body still trembled. Not from pain, but from a childlike hope that reality might diverge from fiction. Didn't. My fingers slipped against the polished floor, leaving streaks of red that looked almost like paint. I wondered vaguely if someone would complain about the mess later. Probably. The Imperial Palace cared about appearances more than people. Remove him. His voice was calm. Low. Final. Not cruel. Not kind. Just uninterested. The guards hesitated. Perhaps because I had once held power, once stood near the throne, once been someone they bowed to, but orders were orders. Rough hands grabbed my arms, lifting me like a broken puppet. My head lolled to the side. For one last, stupid moment, I searched his face. Nothing. Not even annoyance. If hatred had been there, I might have felt relieved. Hatred meant I mattered enough to provoke emotion. But this was worse. I had never existed to him at all. Darkness swallowed everything. When I opened my eyes again, I was 13 years old. At first, I thought death had stripped away memory, leaving only fragments of a dream. The canopy above my bed was unfamiliar. Pale silk embroidered with cranes, and sunlight filtered through gauze curtains, soft and warm against my skin. I breathed in. Sandalwood. Ink. Fresh paper. Not blood. Not iron. Not the suffocating smell of death. My chest rose and fell too easily. No stabbing pain. No wet gurgle. No weakness dragging me down into nothingness. Alive. The realization should have brought relief. Instead, dread coiled slowly in my stomach, because I recognized this room. Not from personal experience. From illustrations. From descriptions repeated across dozens of chapters. From a book I had once read obsessively. A historical Omegaverse novel about court politics, doomed love, and a villain whose jealousy destroyed him. The villain who died in the throne room. The villain who loved the male lead. The villain who lost everything. Me. I sat up too quickly. The world tilted, nausea surging as unfamiliar memories flooded in. Etiquette lessons, poetry recitations, cold smiles from relatives, whispers behind silk sleeves. A lifetime that wasn't mine yet fit perfectly into my mind, slotting into place like pieces of a puzzle I didn't want to complete. Name, status, family, all of it matched the novel. I staggered out of bed and crossed the room on unsteady legs, gripping furniture for support until I reached the bronze mirror. A boy stared back. Delicate features not yet sharpened by adulthood. Long dark hair tied loosely at the nape. Eyes too clear, too young, too alive. No scar on the chest where the blade had entered. No shadow of death. 13 years old. 5 years before the story truly began. 5 years before I would meet him. My hands started to shake. No, I whispered, voice thin and unfamiliar. No, 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 no. This wasn't a second chance. It was a countdown. In the novel, my character, the second male lead, had been introduced as brilliant, elegant, and deeply loyal to the Empire. A noble heir with beauty and talent unmatched by his peers. Someone admired, envied, respected. Someone destined to fall spectacularly. Because he fell in love with the male lead. Obsessively, pathetically, self-destructively. When the Omega protagonist appeared, gentle, pure, everything I wasn't, jealousy twisted him into something ugly. He sabotaged, manipulated, even endangered innocent people, all in a desperate attempt to win affection that had never been his to claim. Readers hated him. I had hated him too, until the execution scene, until I noticed how alone he had been in every frame, even when surrounded by crowds, until I realized no one had ever loved him back. Not family, not friends, not the man he adored, especially not him. A knock sounded at the door. "Young master? Are you awake?" My throat tightened. The maid's voice was gentle, careful. The tone servants used with someone important yet fragile. I didn't answer. If I spoke, I might start screaming. If I started screaming, I might never stop. The handle turned slowly, the door opening just enough for her to peek inside. Relief softened her expression when she saw me standing upright. "Thank goodness. You frightened us yesterday when you collapsed during lessons." Collapsed, right? In this timeline, the original character had suffered a fever at 13, a minor incident mentioned only once. A convenient excuse for why his personality seemed sharper afterward. Because after this point, I would be the one living his life. "I'm fine," I said, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. She approached with a tray of medicine, bowing slightly. "The physician said you must rest. Your constitution has always been delicate." Delicate, another trait from the novel. Beautiful but weak. Graceful but unsuited for physical hardship. A decorative heir rather than a warrior. A sacrifice waiting to happen. I accepted the bowl automatically, hands moving on their own. The bitter liquid burned down my throat, grounding me in unpleasant reality. Not a dream. Not a hallucination. Reincarnation. Transmigration. Whatever name it had, the result was the same. I was trapped inside a story whose ending I already knew. And that ending was death. Avoid him. The thought came with sudden, desperate clarity. If the original character's downfall began with love, then the solution was obvious. Never fall in love. Never get close. Never even become relevant. In the novel, our families had been political allies, which meant frequent meetings, shared events, inevitable interaction. Admiration grew into friendship, friendship into infatuation, infatuation into obsession. A slow poison disguised as devotion. But what if I refused to drink it? What if I stayed distant, polite, forgettable? The male lead wouldn't notice someone who never approached him. Without my interference, he would follow the original plot. Meet the Omega protagonist, fall in love, ascend the throne, live happily ever after. And I would live too, somewhere far away from the capital. Breathing, anonymous, free. For the first time since waking, hope flickered. A small, fragile flame. The first time I saw him again, that hope cracked. It happened at a spring banquet 2 years later, an event the novel had described in loving detail because it marked the Omega protagonist's debut into high society. I had considered feigning illness to avoid attending. Truly, I had. But absence would draw attention, and attention was dangerous. So I went, hiding my nerves behind layers of silk and practiced composure. Music drifted through the garden, soft and elegant. Lanterns glowed among blossoming trees, painting everything in warm gold and rose. Nobles laughed behind fans, exchanging gossip sharper than any blade. And at the center of it all stood the crown prince. Tall, impeccably dressed, radiating authority even while smiling politely at some elderly minister. Exactly as described. exactly as I remembered. My stomach dropped as if I were falling from a great height. He looked older than in my memories of the execution, or perhaps simply more alive. The version burned into my mind had been carved from ice, emotionless and remote. This one moved with effortless grace, acknowledging greetings, offering measured responses, every gesture perfectly calculated. A ruler in the making, a monster in waiting. Don't look at him. I lowered my gaze immediately, turning away as if searching for someone else. My heart hammered so loudly I was certain nearby guests could hear it. Leave. Just leave. But before I could retreat, a subtle hush rippled through the crowd. Servants parted the gathering, creating a path toward the entrance. The Omega protagonist had arrived. Soft murmurs followed them. Admiration, curiosity, envy. Even without looking directly, I could sense the shift in atmosphere, the way attention converged like gravity around a star. In the novel, this was love at first sight. The crown prince would approach, offer a hand, speak gently. Their connection would spark instantly, setting the entire plot into motion. I stepped backward, determined to disappear before becoming collateral damage. And then, pressure. Not physical. Something heavier, like being pinned beneath an unseen gaze. My breath caught. Slowly, against every instinct screaming not to, I looked up. The crown prince was staring directly at me. Not past me. Not through the crowd. At me. Our eyes met across the lantern-lit garden. For a heartbeat, the world fell silent. Recognition flashed through his expression. Sharp, intense, gone so quickly I might have imagined it. The polite smile faded, replaced by something unreadable. Something that made cold sweat prickle along my spine. This wasn't how it was supposed to happen. He was supposed to be looking at the Omega. He was supposed to be captivated by someone else. So why? Your Highness. An attendant's voice broke the moment. The prince blinked once, composure snapping back into place like a mask sliding over his face. He turned away, stepping forward to greet the newly arrived Omega with flawless courtesy. Exactly like the story. Exactly like before. As if those few seconds had never existed. My knees felt weak. I told myself it was coincidence. That he had simply been scanning the crowd and happened to pause. That paranoia was making me imagine significance where there was none. Yes, that had to be it. Because the alternative was impossible. That night, I ordered every mirror in my chambers covered. I didn't want to see the face of the man destined to die. I slept poorly. Dreams dragged me back to the throne room again and again. The echo of footsteps on marble, the smell of blood, the sound of my own breathing turning wet and shallow. Each time, I woke gasping, clutching at my chest as if expecting to find a wound. Each time, there was nothing. Only skin. Only life. Near dawn, exhaustion finally pulled me into a shallow, restless sleep. And into another dream. This one was different. No throne room. No guards. No Omega. Just a dim corridor lit by a single lantern. Footsteps echoed behind me. Slow, unhurried, impossible to outrun. I tried to walk faster, then to run, but the hallway stretched endlessly, doors passing in a blur of carved wood and shadow. The footsteps never changed pace. Closer, closer, closer. A hand closed around my wrist. Cold, firm, inescapable. Found you. I woke with a strangled cry, sitting upright so abruptly the canopy swayed. My wrist throbbed. For a terrifying second, I expected to see fingers wrapped around it. Pale, elegant, merciless. There was nothing, just moonlight spilling across tangled sheets. A dream, only a dream. Yet the sensation lingered, phantom pressure against my skin, as if someone had truly held me there. I pressed my hand to my chest, trying to steady my racing heart. It's not real, I whispered. It's not real. But the words sounded hollow in the silent room. Because deep down, I knew something had already changed. In the original story, the crown prince never noticed the villain until much later. Not at a distance. Not across a crowd. Not like that. which meant one of two things. Either fate had begun to unravel, or I had stepped into a version of the story where the monster was already awake. And somehow, I had the terrible feeling he had been watching me long before I ever looked up. Chapter 2: The Prince Who Shouldn't Notice Me. After the spring banquet, I told myself nothing had changed, that the look we shared meant nothing, that I was not important enough to disrupt the story, that fate would correct any minor deviation on its own. People see what they expect to see. Memory edits reality until it fits. Yes, that was all. I repeated those thoughts every morning while dressing, every evening before sleep. Every time unease crept up my spine like cold fingers. It didn't work, because something had changed. First, it was small things. Invitations. Our household began receiving far more palace summons than before. Luncheons, poetry gatherings, ceremonial rehearsals, obscure events with no clear purpose. My father was pleased. Political visibility was always advantageous. Servants bustled with excitement, polishing heirloom ornaments and airing out formal robes. I was not pleased. In the novel, my character had indeed attended many court functions, but those came later, after his reputation for brilliance attracted attention. At this point in the timeline, he was still considered merely promising, not yet indispensable. So why now? Your presence is specifically requested, the steward informed me, bowing deeply. By order of His Highness. My pulse stuttered. Specifically mine? Yes, young master. The room felt suddenly too small. Refusing a direct request from the Crown Prince would be political suicide. Our family's loyalty could be questioned. Enemies would seize the opportunity to accuse us of arrogance or disobedience. Even feigning illness would only delay the inevitable. There was no choice. There had never been a choice. The palace that day felt different from the one I remembered from the execution. Brighter. Alive. Sunlight glittered across tiled roofs and painted corridors, turning everything almost painfully beautiful. Servants moved efficiently, bowing as nobles passed. The air smelled faintly of plum blossoms drifting from inner gardens. A place meant for celebration, not death. Yet unease clung to me like damp cloth. I kept my gaze lowered as we were escorted through a series of courtyards, focusing on the rhythm of my steps, the weight of silk against my ankles, the steady beat of my heart. Do not draw attention. Do not look around. Do not raise your head. The voice came from directly ahead. Low, calm, impossible to disobey. I froze. Slowly, carefully, I lifted my eyes. He stood only a few paces away. No attendants announcing his arrival. No formal distance maintained. Just the Crown Prince himself, regarding me with an expression so composed it might have been carved from jade. Up close, he was more overwhelming than memory allowed. Height, posture, presence. Everything about him demanded acknowledgement. Even the air seemed to bend around him, as if reality itself recognized its ruler. I bowed immediately, pulse roaring in my ears. This subject greets your highness. Silence followed. Too long. Protocol dictated he should acknowledge the greeting at once, perhaps with a polite phrase before moving on. Instead, he simply watched. I could feel it, the weight of his gaze tracing every detail, from the crown of my head to the tips of my fingers folded neatly before me. Assessing, measuring, memorizing. Stand. My knees nearly buckled as I straightened. When I dared to look up again, he was closer. Had he stepped forward? I hadn't heard movement. I hadn't heard anything over the thunder of my own heartbeat. You seem recovered. His tone was conversational, almost gentle, the kind one might use with a younger sibling or a delicate acquaintance. Not with a political ally's air. Yes, your highness. It was only a minor illness. A pause. Then, you avoided me at the banquet. My breath caught. Not a question. A statement. I would not presume to intrude upon your highness's attention, I replied carefully, choosing each word as if stepping across thin ice. There were many distinguished guests present. Another silence. Longer this time. Something flickered across his eyes. Amusement, perhaps, or irritation. It vanished before I could be certain. Distinguished? He repeated softly, as if tasting the word. For a moment, I thought he might say more. Ask something dangerous. Demand honesty I could not afford to give. Instead, he stepped aside. You may proceed. Dismissed. Relief hit so hard my vision swam. I bowed again, deeper this time, then walked past him with measured composure, resisting the urge to run. Only when several turns of the corridor separated us did I allow myself to breathe properly. My hands were shaking. That should have been the end of it. A brief, unsettling encounter. Nothing more. But the palace summons continued. And with them came the feeling of being observed. It wasn't obvious. No one stared openly. No guards followed too closely. Conversations flowed normally, laughter rising and falling like waves against stone. Yet every time I entered a room, something shifted. Whispers paused. Eyes flicked toward me, then away. Servants appeared precisely when needed, as if anticipating my movements before I made them. Once, while reading in a secluded pavilion, I looked up suddenly, convinced someone stood behind the lattice screen. No one was there. Another time, during a musical performance, the hairs on the back of my neck prickled so sharply I nearly dropped my cup. I scanned the balcony above. Empty except for drifting curtains. Empty. Always empty. It would have been easier to dismiss if not for one detail. Whenever that sensation peaked, that suffocating certainty of being watched, I would eventually glimpse the crown prince somewhere nearby, across a hall, at the end of a garden path, standing in shadow beneath a colonnade, never approaching, never speaking, just present, as if coincidence had grown teeth. You seem pale lately. My attendant's concerned voice pulled me from my thoughts. I'm fine. Are you sleeping poorly? No point lying. Dark circles were difficult to hide completely. Bad dreams. She hesitated, then ventured. Shall I ask the physician for calming herbs? No. Too quick. Too sharp. I softened my tone. It isn't necessary. What could herbs possibly soothe? Fear rooted in knowledge of a future no one else remembered. She bowed, though worry lingered in her expression. After she left, I sat alone in the quiet chamber, staring at the covered mirrors. I had not removed the cloth since that night. Reflection felt dangerous, as if acknowledging this body too fully might lock me permanently into the role of doomed villain. As long as the mirrors stayed hidden, I could pretend this was temporary. A strange interlude before waking. But weeks had passed. No awakening came, only more palace summons, more silent encounters, more invisible eyes. The turning point arrived during a hunting excursion. In the novel, this event served as a bonding moment between the Crown Prince and the Omega protagonist. A dramatic rescue from a runaway horse, heartfelt gratitude, romantic tension. Readers adored it. I had hoped my presence would be unnecessary. I was wrong. Our party rode deep into the imperial forest, banners snapping in the crisp air. Sunlight filtered through towering pines, painting the ground in shifting patterns of gold and shadow. Birds scattered at our approach, their cries echoing like warnings. I kept to the rear, surrounded by minor nobles, focusing on staying unnoticed. Then chaos erupted. A shout, a horse rearing, the Omega protagonist losing control as their mount bolted sideways, eyes wild with panic. Exactly like the novel, panic rippled through the group. Riders struggled to maneuver without causing further accidents. The Omega clung desperately to the reins, face drained of color. In the original story, this was where the Crown Prince spurred forward, catching the runaway horse and pulling the Omega to safety. Heroic, decisive, romantic. I watched, waiting for the moment to unfold. Didn't, because before the prince moved, my own horse screamed. Something struck its flank. An arrow, I realized dimly, and the animal lurched violently, throwing me off balance. Pain exploded through my shoulder as I hit the ground, the impact driving air from my lungs. For a few seconds I couldn't breathe, couldn't move. The world spun in a blur of hooves and shouting. Then strong arms lifted me, pulling me upright against a solid chest. The scent of cold cedar and steel filled my lungs. Sharp, clean, unmistakable. I have you. His voice close to my ear. Too close. I froze. Of all the outcomes I had imagined, this was not one of them. Your Highness. Don't move. The command brooked no argument. One arm remained firmly around my waist, holding me steady as if I weighed nothing. I became acutely aware of every point of contact, the heat through layers of fabric, the strength beneath controlled restraint. Meanwhile, several guards had already secured the panicked horse and surrounded the Omega protagonist, who appeared shaken but unharmed. So the rescue still happened. Just not by him. Not directly. Is he injured? The prince asked without looking away from me. A minor dislocation, it seems, a physician replied after a quick examination. Painful, but not life-threatening. Good. The single word carried quiet finality, as if more serious injury would have been unacceptable to reality itself. Only then did he release me. Slowly, reluctantly, fingers lingering a fraction too long before withdrawing. The sudden absence of contact felt almost like loss. I hated that. Later, as attendants fussed over my shoulder, I replayed the incident again and again. The arrow had come from behind. Stray shot, they said. An unfortunate accident during the confusion. But I had ridden at the rear. No one should have been shooting in that direction. More importantly, the prince had reached me almost instantly, faster than anyone else. Faster than seemed possible given the distance between us moments earlier. As if he had already been watching. As if he had been waiting. That night, sleep did not come at all. Moonlight crept across the floor, pale and merciless. Outside, wind stirred the trees, branches scratching softly against the walls like restless fingers. I lay motionless, staring into darkness, shoulder throbbing in time with my pulse. Every logical explanation I constructed collapsed under its own weight. Coincidence did not track a single person across multiple events. Coincidence did not alter the sequence of major plot points. Coincidence did not feel like breath on the back of your neck when no one stood there. A terrible possibility surfaced. What if the story wasn't changing randomly? What if it was changing because of me? Because I had stepped out of the original script? Because someone refused to let me disappear? My throat tightened. No, impossible. In the novel, the Crown Prince barely acknowledged the villain until much later. His focus was entirely on the Omega protagonist. Political matters, romantic development, external threats. Those drove the plot, not some obscure noble trying to stay out of sight. Unless the version of him in this world had never been following the script to begin with. Unless the affection described in the book had been exaggerated, manufactured, a performance. The thought chilled me more deeply than any nightmare. Because if his love for the Omega was false, then where had all that attention gone instead? A faint sound broke the silence. Not outside, inside. The soft click of wood against wood. My door, opening. I sat up abruptly, heart slamming against my ribs. Who's there? No answer. The room remained dark, shadows pooling in corners like ink. Curtains stirred slightly, though no breeze touched my face. Perhaps a servant checking on me. Perhaps footsteps, slow, deliberate, approaching the bed. Every instinct screamed to run, but my body refused to move, trapped between terror and disbelief. Moonlight shifted as a figure stepped into its path, revealing the outline of broad shoulders, long hair, robes darker than the surrounding night. My mouth went dry. No guards, no attendants, no announcement, only him. The Crown Prince stopped a few paces away, gaze fixed on me with unsettling intensity. You're awake. Not surprise. Observation confirmed. What are you doing here? The words came out hoarse. Silence stretched. Then quietly, making sure you're alive. My blood turned to ice. Before I could respond, he stepped back, already retreating toward the door. The movement was so smooth, so controlled, it almost seemed unreal, like a shadow sliding across a wall. The door closed without a sound, leaving me alone, or at least, appearing to be alone. I did not sleep for the rest of the night. By morning, one truth had become impossible to ignore. The story I remembered, the one where I was irrelevant until my jealousy destroyed me, no longer applied. Because the Crown Prince was paying attention to me now. And attention from someone like him was not a gift. It was a claim. Somewhere deep in my chest, that fragile hope from earlier finally shattered. I had wanted to survive by staying out of the narrative. But survival was impossible when the protagonist refused to let you leave the stage. And worst of all, I was starting to suspect he had never been interested in the Omega at all. Chapter 3. The night I tried to disappear. After the prince entered my chamber, sleep became impossible. Not just that night. Every night. I began to dread the dark in a way that had nothing to do with childhood fears. Darkness meant blindness. Meant something could be standing just beyond reach, watching, waiting, deciding. I ordered additional lamps lit until dawn. Servants exchanged worried glances but obeyed. Rumors spread quickly in noble households. By the end of the week, everyone knew I suffered from lingering shock after the hunting accident. Let them think that madness was safer than truth. Because the truth was simple. The Crown Prince could enter my private quarters whenever he wished. Without permission, without witnesses, without explanation, and no one would stop him. During the day, I functioned as expected. Lessons, correspondence, ceremonies, polite conversation. At night, I listened. Every creak of wood, every whisper of fabric, every brush of wind against shutters. Sometimes nothing happened. Sometimes I thought I heard footsteps, only to discover empty corridors when I forced myself to investigate. And sometimes, I stayed perfectly still, pretending to sleep, because I was certain someone stood near the bed. Breathing quietly, not touching, just there. I never opened my eyes during those moments. Cowardice, perhaps, or instinct. A primitive understanding that acknowledgement would make the situation real in a way I could not survive. Eventually, the presence would fade. The air would feel lighter. Dawn would arrive, leaving me exhausted and no closer to understanding what was happening. Running away stopped being an abstract plan. It became necessity. In the original story, my character had too many attachments, family obligations, political ambitions, emotional dependency, to consider abandoning everything. Pride and obsession chained him to the capital long after it became clear he was losing. I had none of those weaknesses. This world was not truly mine. Yes, the family whose name I carried had treated me kindly. Servants cared for me. Society respected me. But affection built on borrowed memories felt fragile, conditional, like a painting hung on someone else's wall. Survival came first. If staying meant death, or worse, whatever the prince intended, then leaving was the only rational choice. The challenge was doing so without attracting suspicion. A noble heir cannot simply vanish. But he can travel. I wished to visit the southern estates. My father looked up from his documents, brows knitting in mild surprise. So suddenly? The physicians recommended warmer air for my health, I replied smoothly. The winters here have always been difficult for me. Not entirely a lie. This body did tire easily, and my recent sleeplessness had left me pale enough to be convincing. He studied me for a long moment, gaze sharp despite his outward gentleness. You have never shown interest in estate management before. I should begin learning. Another silence. Then he sighed, setting aside the papers. Very well. It would do you good to spend time away from court politics. Relief nearly made my knees weak. However, he continued, you will travel with a full escort. Bandit activity has increased recently. Of course, freedom always came with chains attached. Still, distance mattered more than privacy. Once far enough from the capital, opportunities would arise. Routes could be altered. Escorts could be dismissed under plausible pretexts. Hope stirred again, cautious, fragile. For the first time in weeks, I slept a few hours without nightmares. Preparation took 3 days. Servants packed clothing, medicine, writing materials, small comforts deemed necessary for a noble journey. Carriages were inspected, horses selected, guards briefed. Everything proceeded with the efficiency of a household accustomed to travel. I moved through it all like a ghost, careful not to reveal urgency. Inside, my thoughts raced. South meant warmer climate, fewer direct imperial oversight routes, more coastal access. Ports offered anonymity. Ships departed daily for distant provinces, some even beyond the empire's borders. Once at sea, pursuit would become exponentially harder. A new life could begin, quiet, hidden, safe. On the morning of departure, mist clung to the ground like a veil, softening the edges of buildings and trees. Wheels creaked as the carriage rolled forward, leaving the estate gates behind. I did not look back. Looking back felt like an invitation to regret. For several hours, nothing happened. The road stretched ahead in gentle curves, lined with winter-bare trees whose branches intertwined overhead like skeletal fingers. Guards rode in disciplined formation, their presence reassuring in a mundane way. This was normal. Travel, movement, freedom. My chest loosened gradually, tension draining from muscles I hadn't realized were clenched. Perhaps I had overreacted. Perhaps distance truly was enough. The prince had responsibilities. He could not abandon the capital to chase one insignificant noble across the countryside. Yes, this would work. I allowed myself to close my eyes, lulled by the rhythmic sway of the carriage. The horses screamed. The carriage lurched violently sideways, throwing me against the door. Shouts erupted outside. Confusion, alarm, steel scraping against steel. "What's happening?" I demanded, pushing the door open. A tree blocked the road ahead. Not fallen naturally, the cut was too clean, the placement too deliberate. Bandits emerged from the forest, faces masked, weapons drawn. So this was why escorts had been insisted upon. Guards formed a defensive circle immediately, blades flashing as they engaged the attackers. The clash of metal rang through the air, harsh and chaotic. I shrank back into the carriage, heart pounding. Stay inside. Stay hidden. Let trained soldiers handle it. But something felt wrong. The bandits weren't trying to reach the baggage or even break through the guard line. They fought aggressively yet aimlessly, as if their objective was disruption rather than theft. A diversion. Cold realization crept in. For what? The carriage door on the opposite side opened. I turned sharply and froze. He stood there, framed by gray morning light, utterly incongruous amid the chaos. The crown prince. No armor, no battle readiness, just formal travel robes, immaculate as if he had stepped from a painting rather than into an ambush. For a few seconds, my mind refused to process what I was seeing. "You! Come," he said calmly, extending a hand. Not a request, not an explanation. A command delivered with quiet certainty. "What are you doing here?" My voice shook despite my effort to control it. "You should be in the capital." I was. Which meant nothing. Which answered nothing. Steel clashed nearby, a guard shouting in pain. The smell of blood drifted through the cold air. "Your safety is compromised," he continued, tone as composed as if discussing weather. "Step out." Every instinct screamed danger. Not from the bandits. From him. "I'm perfectly safe with my escort," I said, backing away. His eyes darkened. For the first time, emotion broke through that flawless composure. Not anger exactly, but something far more unsettling. Something possessive. "Do not be difficult." The words were soft. Terrifyingly soft. "I'm not going anywhere with you," I replied, heart hammering so hard it hurt. Silence fell between us. Strange, heavy, insulated from the surrounding battle as if sound itself had been muffled. Then he stepped forward, inside the carriage, closing the distance in a single smooth motion. "There is no need to fear," he said, voice lowering further. "I will not harm you." A promise that felt like a threat. I didn't say I was afraid. You didn't need to. His hand closed around my wrist. Not painfully, firmly, inevitably, exactly like the dream. Panic surged. I twisted, trying to pull free, but his grip only tightened. anchoring me in place as easily as if I were made of paper. Let go. No. The single syllable cut through my protest with chilling finality. Outside, the sounds of combat began to fade. Not because the battle was over, but because distance was growing. The carriage was moving. When had it started moving? I hadn't felt the jolt, the shift, anything. Yet through the window I could see trees sliding past at steady speed. "We are leaving," he said. "Without my guards? They are no longer necessary." My stomach dropped. "What did you do?" "Ensured your safety." The answer was technically correct, which made it far more frightening than a lie. I stopped struggling. Not because I had accepted the situation, because resistance accomplished nothing. His grip remained unyielding, thumb resting lightly against the pulse at my wrist, as if feeling each frantic beat. The contact was not aggressive, yet there was something deeply invasive about it, a quiet assertion of control. "Why?" I asked finally, voice barely above a whisper. He regarded me for a long moment, expression unreadable. "Because you were leaving. That's not a crime. Not normally." Something cold slid down my spine. "Then why?" "You did not inform me." The absurdity of that statement left me speechless. "I'm not required to report my movements to you," I managed. A faint smile touched his lips. "You are." No arrogance. No raised voice. Just certainty. As if this were an established fact I had somehow overlooked. I stared at him, trying to reconcile this calm stranger with the distant figure from the novel. The man supposedly devoted to another, indifferent to me until my jealousy forced confrontation. Nothing matched. Nothing made sense. Unless a horrifying possibility surfaced. "What exactly am I to you?" I asked, unable to keep the tremor from my voice. His gaze sharpened, intensity spiking so abruptly it felt like a physical force. "Someone who should not run away." Not an answer. A claim. The carriage rolled on in silence. I watched the landscape blur past, numbness spreading through my limbs as the reality of the situation settled like heavy chains. Escape attempt. Failed. Distance. Meaningless. Protection. Irrelevant. Because the danger had never been bandits or politics or fate. It had always been him. As dusk approached, the carriage slowed, turning onto a narrow road that wound toward a secluded estate nestled among darkening hills. I did not recognize it from the novel, which meant one thing. This place existed outside the story, outside the script, outside any future I had prepared for. "Where are we?" I asked. "My residence." "I've never heard of it." "You were not meant to." The gates opened without challenge, guards bowing deeply as we passed. Lanterns flickered to life along the path, casting long shadows that seemed to stretch toward the carriage like reaching hands. A gilded cage, I realized. Hidden. Beautiful. Inescapable. The carriage stopped before the main entrance. He released my wrist at last. The absence of contact felt strangely abrupt, leaving behind phantom warmth that made my skin crawl. "Come," he said again, stepping down first and offering his hand. I didn't take it. For a moment, something dangerous flashed across his face. Irritation, perhaps, or the echo of violence barely restrained. Then it was gone, replaced by that same calm mask. As if he had decided patience was the better strategy. I climbed down on my own. The doors closed behind us with a sound far too final for comfort. Inside, the estate was quiet. No bustling servants. No distant chatter. Only a few attendants moving silently through corridors lit by soft golden lamps. The air smelled faintly of cedar and ink, the same scent that had clung to him during the hunting accident. My stomach twisted. "Your room is prepared," he said. Prepared. Not chosen. Not offered. Prepared. I didn't agree to stay. "You don't need to." A chill ran through me. "What happens if I refuse?" He stopped walking. For a long moment he did not turn around. When he finally did, his expression was composed, almost gentle. But his eyes were not gentle at all. "I would prefer you not to test that." Not a threat. Not exactly. Worse, a boundary drawn in stone. That night, I sat on the edge of an unfamiliar bed, hands clenched in the fabric of my robes. The room was luxurious, comfortable, meticulously arranged. Everything a guest might require. Everything except a lock on the inside of the door. Moonlight spilled across the floor, pale and unforgiving. I did not bother lying down. Sleep felt like surrender, and surrender felt like dying. Somewhere in the estate, footsteps echoed faintly through the halls. Slow, unhurried, coming closer. I finally understood something the original villain never had. This was not a romance story where persistence would eventually be rewarded. This was a trap that had been closing long before I noticed it. And now there was nowhere left to run. Chapter 4: The Truth He Refused to Hide. Morning came without mercy. I must have fallen asleep at some point. Not real sleep, just a thin, fragile unconsciousness born from exhaustion. When I opened my eyes, sunlight was already filtering through gauze curtains, warm and deceptively peaceful. For a few seconds, I didn't remember where I was. Then the unfamiliar ceiling came into focus. The silence, the scent of cedar, the absence of guards outside my door. Memory returned all at once, heavy and suffocating. Not home, not traveling, not safe, captured. I sat up slowly, half expecting dizziness, nausea, some physical sign of distress. My body felt fine, rested even. Whoever had prepared this room had anticipated every need. Soft bedding, fresh water, folded garments, a tray of untouched food kept warm by a small brazier. Hospitality as restraint. A cage lined with silk. I swung my legs over the side of the bed and stood, testing the floor as if it might vanish beneath me. Still solid. Still real. The door stood exactly where I remembered it, polished wood gleaming faintly in the morning light. Unlocked. Of course it was unlocked. Locks imply fear of resistance. Confidence requires none. I crossed the room and pulled it open. 2 attendants waited outside, bowing immediately. Not guards. Not armed. Just servants in subdued uniforms, expressions politely neutral. "Good morning, young master," one said softly. "His Highness hopes you rested well." The phrasing made my skin crawl. "He's here." Yes. A useless question, then. Where else would he be? "I want to leave." Neither attendant reacted. No shock. No protest. No hurried explanation. Only a slight lowering of their gazes, as if acknowledging something inevitable. "We will inform His Highness," the other replied. Not "you may leave." Not "we cannot allow that." Just a message delivered upward, as though my autonomy were a bureaucratic matter. They guided me to a dining room overlooking a small inner garden. The space was intimate, designed for private meals rather than formal banquets. Sunlight filtered through paper screens, illuminating a table set for 2. Steam curled from porcelain dishes arranged with meticulous care, rice, fish, pickled vegetables, delicate pastries. And at the head of the table, already seated, was the Crown Prince. He looked up as I entered. Something softened in his expression. Relief, perhaps. So fleeting I might have imagined it. He gestured to the chair opposite him. "Sit." I remained standing. "You abducted me," I said flatly. "I relocated you." "That's not better." A faint curve touched his lips, as if my indignation amused him. "You are unharmed, comfortable, safe." "Against my will." Silence. Then quietly, "Your will was endangering you." Rational, calm, completely detached from the reality of what he had done. "I was traveling to my family's estate," I shot back, "with an official escort. To a port city." My stomach dropped. "You intended to board a ship," he continued, voice even. "Destination uncertain. Likely permanent departure from the Empire." Every detail. He knew every detail. "How?" "Your preparations were thorough," he said. "But not invisible." Cold spread through my chest. "You were watching me." Not a question. He did not deny it. I sat slowly, legs unsteady. If he had known my plan from the beginning, Then the ambush on the road hadn't been opportunistic. It had been arranged. How long? I asked, staring at the table rather than his face. How long have you been monitoring my movements? Monitoring is an imprecise term. Then choose a precise one. A pause. Since the banquet. My hands tightened in my lap. The first moment our eyes met. You had no reason, I whispered. He studied me for a long time before answering. I had every reason. Servants entered silently, placing additional dishes before withdrawing again. Neither of us touched the food. You should eat, he said. I'm not hungry. You will be. I'd rather starve. Something dangerous flickered across his gaze. Not anger, exactly, but something close to it. You will eat, he repeated, softer this time, which somehow made it worse. A command disguised as concern. Slowly, deliberately, he picked up a pair of chopsticks and placed them in my hand. The gesture was gentle, intimate, unacceptable. My fingers trembled around the lacquered wood. For a moment I considered dropping them, refusing outright, forcing a confrontation. But confrontation implied leverage. I had none, so I ate. Small bites, tasteless despite the quality. He watched quietly, attention unwavering, as if ensuring each swallow actually occurred. Only when I set the chopsticks down did he relax slightly, satisfied, like someone confirming a fragile creature would survive another day. Why me? The question slipped out before I could stop it. He tilted his head, considering. You truly don't know. No. Faint exhale, almost disappointment. In the original story, I began before I could censor myself. You were devoted to someone else. The moment the words left my mouth, I froze. Too much. Too revealing. But his reaction was not confusion. It was interest. Original story, he repeated softly. An intriguing phrase. My pulse spiked. I know what you meant. His eyes sharpened, studying me with renewed intensity. You have always spoken as if comparing reality to something unseen, predicting events before they occur, avoiding situations before they become dangerous. My throat closed. You noticed. Of course I noticed. Not pride, not accusation, simply fact. You collapsed at 13, he continued, voice low. Afterward, you became different, more cautious, less trusting, as though you had glimpsed something you wished to avoid. Every word landed like a hammer. You stopped seeking my company, he added, despite previously doing so at every opportunity, because the original villain had adored him. I assumed illness had altered your temperament, he said. Until the banquet. Our eyes met. And then, he finished, you looked at me as if you already knew I was dangerous. Silence swallowed the room. There was nowhere to hide now. No safe response. Denial would sound hollow. Admission would sound insane. So I said nothing. He leaned back slightly, gaze never leaving my face. Who told you? He asked. No one. Then how did you know? Because I watched you kill me. The words burned in my throat. Unspeakable. I just had a bad feeling. A weak answer. Transparent. He accepted it anyway. For once, your instincts were correct. A chill ran through me. You're admitting it? That I am dangerous? Faint smile. To some people, yes. Am I one of them? The question hung between us like a blade. His expression changed, not dramatically, but enough. The composure remained, yet something warmer, darker, more personal seeped through. No, he said softly. You are the reason. My heart skipped. The reason for what? For restraint. The simplicity of the statement made it far more terrifying than any elaborate explanation. He rose from his seat and walked toward the window, hands clasped behind his back. Sunlight outlined his figure, turning him into a silhouette, a ruler contemplating a domain only he could see. In the capital, he said without turning, every movement I make is observed, interpreted, manipulated. Affection becomes leverage. Indifference becomes insult. A pause. Privacy does not exist. So you built this place? I said slowly. To escape, to control variables. Not rest, not comfort, control. And brought me here why? He turned then, gaze settling on me with unsettling intensity. Because you were about to remove yourself from those variables entirely. You could have let me go. No. Immediate. Absolute. Why not? He stepped closer, closing the distance until I could feel the heat radiating from him. The faint scent of cedar that now seemed permanently embedded in my senses. Because you belong here. My breath caught. With you. I asked before I could stop myself. Yes. Not hesitation. Not embarrassment. Certainty. That's insane. I whispered. Perhaps. You barely know me. Another small smile, this one almost pitying. I know more than you think. Name 3 things about me that aren't in official records. The challenge slipped out, born from desperation. He considered for only a second. You prefer bitter tea to sweet. You hum when reading difficult passages. You stop breathing briefly when anxious. Each statement struck with surgical precision. Not guesses. Observations. How would you? I told you, he said quietly. I have been watching. Not recently. Not casually. Watching. A memory surfaced. Nights when I felt a presence near the bed. The subtle sense of eyes in empty rooms. Coincidences too consistent to be random. My stomach twisted. Were you in my chambers? I asked, voice barely audible. He did not look away. Yes. The word shattered something inside me. Why? A long silence followed. When he finally spoke, his voice had changed, softer, stripped of the formal distance he maintained so carefully. To ensure you were still there. Couldn't breathe. Still there. You have a habit of disappearing, he said. Emotionally, socially, physically if given the chance. Like trying to leave the empire. Each time you withdrew, I had to confirm you had not gone somewhere I could not follow. Something in his tone. Not anger, not frustration, but a deep, quiet urgency. Made my chest ache in a way I didn't understand. You make it sound like I'm a possession, I said. He considered that. Then, without hesitation, you are. The room seemed to tilt. You can't just decide that. I didn't decide. His gaze sharpened. It was always true. According to who? Me. Of course. Power defines reality when no one can oppose it. I pushed back from the table, chair scraping softly against the floor. I want to go home. You are home. No, I'm not. His expression darkened, a storm gathering behind controlled features. Your family will be informed you are recovering in a secure location, he said. They will not worry. That's not the point. What is the point? That I didn't choose this. For the first time, my composure cracked completely. Fear, anger, exhaustion, everything spilled out in a rush. You don't get to decide where I live, who I see, what I do just because you. Because I what? The interruption was quiet, deadly quiet. I realized then that I had never actually named what he was doing. Obsession, possession, fixation, love, twisted into something unrecognizable. Because you're afraid I'll leave, I finished. Silence fell. He did not deny it. When he spoke again, his voice was almost gentle. Yes, one word, heavy as fate. I would not survive losing you, he added. Not melodrama, not manipulation. A statement delivered with the calm certainty of someone describing weather patterns or political outcomes. As if this were simply fact. My throat tightened painfully. You've never even had me, I whispered. Something raw flashed across his face. Gone so quickly it left no trace except the echo of emotion. Haven't I? In that moment I understood something horrifying. From his perspective, this had never been a pursuit. It had been maintenance. Keeping something he believed already belonged to him from slipping away. Outside, wind stirred the garden leaves, their soft rustling the only sound in the suffocating quiet. I realized then that the Omega protagonist, the supposed center of the original romance, had not been mentioned once. Not in explanation. Not in justification. Not even as a deflection. As if they had never mattered at all. A question formed, fragile and dangerous. If I'm so important, I said slowly, why pretend to care about someone else? His eyes narrowed slightly. Pretend. The Omega, I clarified. Everyone believes you're devoted to them. Understanding dawned in his expression. Not embarrassment. Not guilt. Amusement. A cold, sharp curve of the lips. Ah, he said softly. That. The casual dismissal sent a shiver down my spine. They were useful, he continued. Gentle. Inoffensive. Politically advantageous. Useful. A distraction, he corrected. For the court. For foreign envoys. For anyone inclined to monitor my personal interests. Not affection. Not love. Strategy. And for me? I asked, dread pooling in my stomach. His gaze locked onto mine. Intensity flaring so brightly it felt like standing too close to fire. Especially for you. My blood ran cold. I needed to see whether jealousy would draw you closer, he said quietly. Whether competition would provoke a reaction. A test. A calculated experiment. When you did nothing, he continued, I realized a different approach was required. Avoidance had not freed me. It had escalated his efforts. You're insane, I said again, but the words sounded weak even to my own ears. Possibly. Not denial. Not apology. Acceptance. He stepped back, restoring a fraction of space between us. You are tired, he said, tone shifting to something almost gentle again. Rest today. We can continue this discussion when you are calmer. Dismissed. Contained. Managed. As if my emotional collapse were merely another variable to control. I left the dining room on unsteady legs, guided by silent attendants back to my chamber. The door closed behind me with a soft click. Not locked. It didn't need to be, because I finally understood the truth he had refused to hide. This was never about preventing my death. Never about protecting me from external danger. Never about romance in any conventional sense. It was about possession, and somewhere deep inside, beneath terror and anger and despair, another feeling stirred, quieter, more treacherous. The terrible realization that he had meant every word. That his obsession was not performative, not temporary, not negotiable. It was permanent. I sank onto the bed, staring at my trembling hands. Escape had failed. Resistance felt futile. And worst of all, part of me no longer believed anyone would come to rescue me. Because in this story, the monster wasn't hiding anymore. He was simply waiting for me to stop fighting. Chapter 5: The Choice That Was Never Mine. The days that followed settled into a quiet routine that felt more unsettling than any open threat. No guards dragged me back when I wandered through the estate's corridors. No locked doors barred my way. Servants treated me with careful politeness, neither warm nor cold, as if they had been instructed to make me comfortable without encouraging familiarity. Every need was anticipated before I voiced it. Fresh clothing appeared in the wardrobe each morning. Meals arrived exactly when hunger began to stir. Even the lamps were adjusted to the brightness I preferred without my asking. If this was captivity, it was designed by someone who understood that physical chains were unnecessary. At first, I searched constantly for weaknesses in the system. I tested doors that led outside, noted which windows opened wide enough to climb through, listened for guard rotations, and observed the layout of the grounds from every angle I could access. The estate was large but not enormous, nestled against forested hills on one side and bordered by steep cliffs on the other. A narrow road connected it to the main highway, guarded discreetly but effectively. Anyone attempting to flee on foot would be visible long before reaching cover. Still, I told myself that escape was possible. It had to be. People left places like this every day. Carriages arrived with supplies and departed again. Messengers came and went. Servants occasionally traveled to nearby villages. If I could blend in or create a distraction, I might slip away unnoticed. That fragile hope sustained me through the first week. He did not interfere. The Crown Prince did not confine me to my room or demand constant companionship. In fact, he seemed to appear only when I least expected him, as if guided by an intuition I could not anticipate. Sometimes he joined me for meals without prior notice, sitting across the table in composed silence while I struggled to pretend his presence did not unsettle me. Other times I would catch sight of him at a distance in the gardens, speaking with attendants or reading beneath a pavilion roof, his attention outwardly occupied even though I could not shake the feeling that he remained aware of me. He never touched me again. Not since the journey. That restraint should have reassured me, yet it did the opposite. It felt deliberate, like a hunter choosing not to spring a trap because the prey had nowhere left to run. The opportunity came sooner than I expected. Late one afternoon, rain swept across the hills in a sudden silver curtain, blurring the landscape and drumming against the tiled roofs. The storm drove most servants indoors and forced guards to seek shelter beneath the gatehouse awning. Visibility dropped to almost nothing beyond a few dozen paces. Perfect conditions for disappearing. I had been studying the estate long enough to know that a maintenance path ran along the inner wall toward a small postern gate used by delivery workers. Normally it remained closed and watched, but during heavy rain inspections were less frequent. If I reached the forest before anyone realized I was gone, the terrain might hide my trail long enough to put distance between myself and the estate. I did not allow myself to think beyond that point. Planning too far ahead invited fear, and fear could paralyze. I simply moved. A cloak concealed my face as I slipped through a side corridor, heart pounding so loudly I worried it might echo against the stone walls. Every footstep sounded impossibly loud despite the storm's roar outside. I expected someone to call out at any moment, to feel a hand close around my arm and pull me back. No one did. The postern gate loomed ahead, iron hinges slick with rainwater. For a terrible second I thought it might be locked, but when I pushed, it opened with a low groan that was swallowed by thunder. Cold air rushed in, carrying the scent of wet earth and pine. Freedom. I stepped through and did not look back. The forest swallowed me almost immediately. Rain cascaded through the branches in shimmering sheets, soaking my clothing within minutes and turning the ground into treacherous mud. Twigs snapped underfoot despite my efforts to move quietly. Visibility shrank to a tunnel of gray between tree trunks. Still, I kept going. Downhill, away from the estate, toward the faint suggestion of a path that might eventually lead to a village or road. My lungs burned from exertion, and my legs trembled from tension, but adrenaline pushed me forward. If I stopped, I would start thinking. If I started thinking, I might turn around. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours. The storm showed no sign of easing, and the forest grew denser the farther I traveled. Branches clawed at my sleeves, roots caught at my boots, and more than once I stumbled badly enough to nearly fall. Eventually the sounds of the estate faded completely. No voices, no distant bells, no sense of human presence at all. Only rain and wind and the relentless pounding of my heart. I slowed at last, bending forward with hands braced on my knees as I fought to catch my breath. For the first time since leaving, a fragile spark of triumph flickered through me. I had done it. I had created enough distance that even if they noticed my absence now, tracking me through this weather would be difficult. Maybe I really could vanish. Maybe. A hand closed gently around my shoulder. I froze, every muscle locked in place as if my body had turned to stone. The grip was not painful, not forceful, yet there was an unmistakable solidity to it, a quiet assurance that resistance would accomplish nothing. Slowly, reluctantly, I straightened. He stood behind me, rain sliding off his dark cloak, expression calm as though we had met during a casual stroll rather than a desperate flight through a storm. For several seconds I could not speak. My mind struggled to reconcile the impossibility of his presence with the undeniable reality of it. "How did you?" My voice broke, raw from cold air and panic. "I followed you." The simplicity of the answer made it worse. "You couldn't have. I left quietly. No one saw me." "I saw you." Of course he had. A hollow sound escaped my throat, something between a laugh and a sob. "Do you ever stop watching?" His gaze softened slightly, but he did not look away. No. Rain plastered my hair to my face, dripped down my neck, soaked through layers of fabric until I shivered uncontrollably. He noticed, of course. He always noticed. "You'll become ill," he said, removing his cloak and draping it over my shoulders despite my weak attempt to shrug it off. The garment was warm, lined with thick fabric that trapped heat immediately. "I don't want your help," I muttered, though I did not push it away again. "I know." "Then why?" "Because you need it." There was no condescension in his tone, only quiet certainty, as if my preferences mattered less than my condition. Anger surged, cutting through fear long enough for words to spill out. "I ran because you kidnapped me," I said, turning to face him fully. "Because you refused to let me leave. Because you act as if my life belongs to you." Rain streamed down his face, darkening his hair and softening the sharp lines of his features. For a moment he looked younger, almost vulnerable, but the intensity in his eyes remained unchanged. "And if I let you go," he asked quietly, "would you ever come back?" The question caught me off guard. No. Honesty came too quickly to suppress. Something in his expression tightened. Not anger exactly, but a deep, controlled pain that vanished before I could be certain I had seen it. "Then you understand why I cannot release you. That doesn't make it right. Right and wrong are luxuries of people with equal power." A bitter truth spoken without pride. I stepped backward, testing the distance between us, wondering if I could run again. He did not move to block me, yet the forest behind him felt impenetrable, as if the world itself had closed ranks. "You don't love me?" I said suddenly, grasping for something that might weaken his resolve. "You don't even know me well enough for that." He regarded me for a long moment before answering. "I know enough. That's not love. It's obsession. If you prefer that word, I will not argue." The lack of denial unsettled me more than anger would have. "Why me?" I demanded. "Out of everyone in the Empire, why fixate on someone who clearly wants nothing to do with you?" For the first time, he hesitated. Rain filled the silence between us, a steady hiss that seemed to muffle the rest of the world. When he spoke again, his voice had lost some of its composure. "Because you were the only one who never wanted anything from me." I blinked, thrown by the unexpected answer. "Everyone else seeks favor, protection, advantage, affection they can display for status," he continued. "You withdrew. You avoided attention even when it would have benefited you. You looked at me as if I were something dangerous rather than something desirable." He took a slow step closer, stopping just short of touching me. No one had ever done that before. Understanding crept in, unwelcome and heavy. To someone raised in a world where admiration was constant and transactional, indifference could feel like revelation. Fear could be mistaken for honesty. Distance could become irresistible simply because it was rare. "You could have ignored me," I said weakly. "I tried." A faint, humorless smile touched his lips. "It did not work." Thunder rolled across the hills, vibrating through the ground beneath our feet. The storm showed no sign of ending, and the cold had begun to seep into my bones despite the cloak. "I'm tired," I admitted, voice barely audible. "I don't want to fight anymore." Something changed in his expression, tension easing in a way that made my chest ache unexpectedly. "Then don't," he said softly. He extended his hand, palm up, not grasping this time, not commanding, simply offering. "Come back." I stared at that hand for a long time. Accepting it would mean surrendering the last illusion of control I possessed. Refusing would mean standing alone in a storm with nowhere else to go. In the end, the decision did not feel dramatic or noble. It felt small, exhausted, painfully human. My fingers trembled as I placed them in his. He closed his hand around mine with careful gentleness, as if afraid I might shatter. The walk back to the estate passed in silence. He did not pull me along or hurry my steps. He simply remained beside me, matching my pace, occasionally steadying me when the ground became treacherous. The contact between us was warm, solid, grounding in a way I did not want to analyze too closely. By the time the gates came into view through the rain, my legs felt like lead and my thoughts had dulled to a numb haze. Servants rushed forward with umbrellas and blankets, their relief poorly concealed. No one questioned where we had been. No one commented on my soaked clothing or mud-streaked boots. They behaved as though this outcome had always been expected. Inside, warmth enveloped us immediately. Someone pressed a cup of hot tea into my hands while others began preparing a bath. The efficiency was almost frightening. He did not leave. He stood nearby while attendants fussed over me. Gaze steady, presence unmistakable. Not intrusive, not hovering, simply there, ensuring I did not vanish again. Later, wrapped in clean robes and exhaustion, I sat on the edge of the bed while servants withdrew, leaving the room quiet except for the soft crackle of a brazier. He remained by the window, watching the rain taper off into a fine mist. "I'm sorry," I said suddenly, surprising even myself. He turned slightly. "For what?" "For trying to run." A long pause followed. "I am not," he replied at last. "If you had not tried, you would still be wondering whether escape was possible." Honesty, stripped of comfort. "And now?" I asked. "Now you know." "Yes, I did." He approached slowly, stopping a respectful distance away. "I will not chain you here," he said. "You may walk the grounds, read, write, pursue whatever interests you. If you wish to return to the capital eventually, we can arrange that." Hope flickered before I could stop it. "Together," he added quietly. The spark died. "You see," he continued, voice gentle but unyielding, "I am willing to compromise. I only ask that you remain within reach. Within reach. Not free. Not equal. But not entirely powerless either." I lay down at last, exhaustion dragging me toward sleep despite my lingering fear. For once, I did not resist it. Fighting had achieved nothing except pain. As my eyes drifted closed, I sensed rather than saw him move closer, the faint rustle of fabric the only indication. "Rest," he murmured, so softly it might have been meant for himself rather than me. "You are safe." Safe. An ambiguous word. Safe from the world outside, perhaps. Safe from political schemes and violent threats and uncertain futures. Not safe from him. Sleep claimed me fully for the first time since arriving at the estate. No nightmares followed. Only a deep, heavy darkness that felt almost peaceful. When I woke hours later, the room was dim, lit only by a single lamp. Rain had stopped entirely, leaving the air cool and fresh through the open window. He sat beside the bed, not touching, not speaking, simply watching with an expression that held something close to relief. "You're still here," he said quietly. It was not a question. I swallowed, voice rough from sleep. "Yes." A slow breath left him, tension draining from his shoulders in a way I had never seen before. "Good." In that moment, I understood the shape of the future awaiting me. Not a dramatic imprisonment. Not constant conflict. Something quieter, more insidious. A life carefully arranged so that leaving would always be harder than staying. A bond built from proximity, dependence, and the gradual erosion of resistance. Perhaps, in time, even something resembling comfort. I turned my face toward the pillow, too tired to argue, too uncertain to protest. For now, remaining was easier. For now, survival meant accepting the terms I could not change. Somewhere behind me, he shifted slightly, settling into the chair as if prepared to remain there all night. Watching, guarding, waiting. And for the first time since this nightmare began, I did not feel the urge to run. Not because I had forgiven him. Not because I had stopped being afraid. But because a quiet, unsettling thought had taken root. If he truly intended to keep me forever, then perhaps learning how to live within that forever was the only way to endure it.